All right, I would like now to share a screen. And I hope you can see it. Otherwise, just read it. The post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, how human nature balks at violence and its results. During the Falklands War in 1982, 255 British soldiers were killed. However, after the war was over and they had returned home, 300 British veterans of the war killed themselves. If you argue that these soldiers committed suicide because of traumatization by what happened in this war, the reaction of conservatives is often this. They point out that there are a lot of reasons for the veterans' despair, including economic, health, sexual, familial, or work-related issues. And they are right. Usually there is a whole complex of factors that cause suicide. But following traumatization, human nature doesn't have the resilience necessary to overcome these problems. Under the influence of traumatization, the individual loses the power that she or he needs to manage her or his life. People that are traumatized have disintegrated internally. They have seen terrible things they never saw before, or couldn't even imagine up to the moment they had to witness them. What they experienced concerned mortal injuries, detached arms and legs and heads, gaping stomachs, oozing guts or brain, terrible fear, screams of agony, death. They witnessed fatal explosions, torture, and rape. They witnessed the agony of comrades as well as the individuals they were firing at. Their own soul and body cannot come to terms with such events. Their mirror neurons transfer the awful experiences into their own emotional world. They enable us to feel what others feel and to feel that there is something wrong. Often soul and body break under the dreadful things that happen. Traumatization is proof of something happening that is against human nature. Traumatization is the collapse of soul and body facing violence and death, and therefore one of the most serious reasons for abolishing war in particular and violence in general. War is contrary to nature. Thank you very much indeed for listening. And welcome to Global Peace Studies for Sustainable Development in Africa, where we discuss pertinent issues of peace and sustainability across the world. And today we have a very important theme, which is the consequences of the lack of peace on psychological well-being among East African population. And the speaker today is Dr. Celestin Mutuimana, who is a psychotherapist, a filmmaker, a trainer, mentor, and researcher, and a project manager with over 12 years of experience at national and international levels. And now, currently, Dr. Celestin Mutuimana is a postdoc researcher at the ETH Zurich and honorary fellow at the University of Zurich, Department of Psychology, Division of Psychopathology and Clinical Interventions in Switzerland. His research interest includes trauma-related disorders, intergenerational trauma, and development of culturally sensitive interventions that aim to give voice to trauma survivors and prevent trauma transmission. Dr. Mutuyimana decided to become a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist because he grew up in Rwanda, a country where many people suffered from trauma-related disorders with less professional help. Therefore, he founded a Baho Smile Institute, BSI, one of the psychotherapeutic and research centers in Rwanda, whose main goal is to help people become aware of their mental disorders, prevention of mental disorders, and providing professional help through the main leading target, restoration of Ubuntu in traumatized population. Dr. Mutuyimana is passionate about promoting a healed society equipped with positive thinking and positive parenting, and to show the public the extent of the impact of mental disorders and the path to recovery. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Celestine Mutuyimana. It's our pleasure having you amongst us, and my memory tells me you are the first person from Rwanda to speak at Global Peace Studies. So this is a great honor to have you. So please, you are welcome, and please, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, George. I think always you hear me. Do you hear me well?
Yes, I hear you well.
Okay. Greetings from Switzerland. I'm now in Zurich, in the nice observatory of University Zurich. We are 1 hour. You are 1 hour in advance to us. So we have a very nice weather today. It is sunny day, and I think tomorrow also is a sunny day. It's not yet winter. Yeah. So very much happy to be to present in this platform of global peace sustainability. I was not thinking to be in such kind of platform as a psychologist, but now I am. Thank you for the invitations, and I thank you everyone who came to hear about how the impact of lack of peace in psychological well-being. Yes, I guess we will have nice discussions, and yeah, and the entire hour will be full of exchange. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
May I continue with the presentation, or?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Continue.
Then I can try to share my. Do you see my desktop?
Yes.
Yeah, you can see that.
Yes, I see it.
Yes, this is the presentations. This is who I am. I think you tried to say a lot. I am a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist from Rwanda. You can see the picture here I'm mentioning with the mouse. This is the lake on the top of the one of the volcanic mountains in Rwanda, Bisoke. And I am also a filmmaker, as you said. Recently, I went out, and I am trauma-related guy, especially from sub-Saharan African, but also globally. So today, this is the university. I am not talking about it because I talked a lot. I'm now working at ETH Zurich. So I don't know if I will use the 1 hour because I used to have short presentations with cognitive psychology. They say people with long presentation, people are no longer interested, but I will try my best. So before we talk about the consequences, I wish we talk about the history of suffering in Africa and trauma. So it's we have been experiencing a collective and cumulative traumatic experience from many years ago. you can see the Africans have been exposed to slavery for more than 200 years, and this was so traumatic. Maybe we were not there, but our ancestors have been so long suffering from the slavery. And then after the slavery, you can see the slavery ended in 1865, but then after the slavery, it's colonization. The period of colonization also was full of traumatic exposures. Yes, I may say to my side that the colonization brings something which is positive. This is my side, but also there were wars. There were sometimes of mistreatment, tortures that happened during the colonizations. After the colonizations, I'm sorry, I'm going back. After the colonizations, then it's a period of so-called independence in 1960s. Up to today, maybe some countries always in Africa, they say we are still fighting for our independence. We are still not dependent. But then was at the end of colonization, we say, oh, we are starting the independence. And maybe the people in that period thought this is the time to end up violence, or maybe there will be no war, we'll start our lives. But then it's the period of wars, genocide, critical living condition, and today imperialism. So we, from that period of 1960s with wars and genocide and critical living conditions, Africa is divided in 4 puzzles. One puzzle, I call it, it's called the rebels, because they say you are rebels. You are not Africans, you are rebels, you are against the human rights. And the other puzzle is called leaders. Yeah, you are leaders, and then the leaders have to fight against rebels. And this is always the cycle. So also the community, which is not the rebels, which is not the leaders, it's also divided in 2. One side of the community have to support the rebels, another side of the community have to support the leaders. So this is the cycle of puzzles in Africa. And this is the cycle of trauma. People are always traumatized, and who traumatize Africans? Themselves, because of their divisions, but they are not easy to know how can we overcome such kind of trauma exposure. And who brings? I think, I don't know, but yeah, this is what happens in most of African countries. It's very rare, even maybe not possible to have the rebels in Europe. I don't know if there is rebels in Europe, American, or other countries. They are not, but we always have the rebels. And then we have leaders to fight against the rebels, and the community to divide it in twice. So we can see how trauma persisted for a long time from such periods of slavery, colonizations, independence, wars, and then the divisions which sustain. Then because of such kind of wars, refugees, immigrations, what happens? It's as consequences, it's immigrations, refugees. In the UNHCR in 2022, they said in East Africa only, and the Horn of Africa and Great Lakes region hosted nearly 5 million of refugees at the end of 2022. This is 20% of global refugees populations because of those traumatic experiences. And you can imagine the critical living condition in the refugees camps, in immigration, in pre-migration, in post-migration, in integrations. This is always traumatic. So what might be the consequences? The consequences you can imagine. Here, there is a lot of consequences. But come back at what we are talking about now. How can we have peace if we are divided? How can we have peace if we are in a refugee camp, if we are still in immigrations? How can we have, and we cannot have peace with instability on psychological well-being. So the main consequences that I'm talking today is psychological well-being. The first one is historical trauma. Because of those corrective traumatic experiences that I was talking about, people are suffering from unresolved griefs, and then the community mistrust, high level of criminality and delinquency, impossibility to work, people are exhausted, and there is inseparability of the traumatic exposure and the current life. People are still always, the discussions of many people of Africa is to talk about what can we do to overcome this conflict? What can we do? It's not what can we do to make industry of cars. It's not what can we do to make industry of train. It's what can we do to stop conflict within each other, because there is a lack of stopping such kind of historical trauma. There is that, sorry, not only the historical trauma, but also mental disorders. The mental disorders is the second pillar of Africans, because the studies shows, the WHO studies shows that in 2015, 17 from 2000, in 15 years, from 2000 up 2015, 17, almost 18 million died due to mental health disorders. And this is very much critical, because this is the second killer of Africans. The first killer was the parasites disorders and the microbes, parasites and the microbes disorders. You can imagine after microbes and the parasite disorders, then the second killer of Africans is mental disorders. And this is because of what? Of those cumulative traumatic experiences. So we can see the global annual rates for visit, for people who are going to look for support for mental disorders. The global rates, it's 1,000 per 100,000 of people, but in Africa, it's 4,000. That means there is maybe not maybe, because I know the availability of service for mental disorder, that treat mental disorder efficiently, but also our awareness of what the services might do to their life. So there is problems, because WHO said that population of Africa is expected to double. If the population of Africa is expected to double, then there will be a competitive life, and there is still ongoing current traumatic exposures like wars, migrations, conflicts, and political crisis. Then the competitions to get to find a job, especially for young people, they will fail. And then it is more likely that mental disorder will increase significantly in African countries. What are those disorders? We can see I did not talk about all the disorders, but depression is at 9% in the suicide. Post-traumatic stress disorders, where people, maybe depression is a disorder, commonly known disorders, but the post-traumatic stress disorders, it's the consequences. I think in the introduction with the military, post-traumatic military service, But people are always thinking about the past. They are affected by their past exposure to traumatic events like war and the genocide, and they have symptoms of hyperarousal, avoidance in the sense of persistent sense of threat. Then there is also complex PTSD, where people are chronically feeling of post-traumatic experiences, and then the traumatic experiences also affect their the relationship and the current life with others. Recently, we have found that there is what is called cultural scripts of trauma. So, although the science shows different disorders in the criteria, PTSD, depression and anxiety among Africans, due to this lack of peace, due to this chronic post-traumatic exposure, that we have found there are other symptoms which are really specific for Africans because of the culture, because of the nature of traumatic exposure. There is specific symptoms. For example, Africans in East Africa, they say heart wounds. And the heart wounds does not really talk about post-traumatic stress, although it's related to trauma, but it's a heart wounds. There are others which say painful scars. That means people, although they tried to recover, to bounce back, but they still feel some pain in their heart. So this is cultural scripts of trauma. And maybe other people, they say we have an empty family because many people have been died during the war, the genocide, and they say it's good to have a lot of children, and now we are feeling an empty family. This is, and grief, unresolved grief symptoms. Another thing is then the consequences of those disorders is like there is an intergenerational trauma. In Africa, we have a higher rates of intergenerational trauma, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, historical trauma, by which means by the mean of parenting, by the mean of biology, by the mean of the attachments. When I say parenting, that means if I have been for so long in the refugee camp, the only way I know is the traumatic. And this is what I am more likely. I'm not saying it's all refugees, they will have traumatized children, because some people learn by their traumatic experience that they change positively by post-traumatic growth. But others, they are more likely to transmit their trauma to their children because the parenting style is harsh, is abusive, is violent, and then they transmit their traumatic experiences to their children. Because the studies, some biological studies that I'm not an expert, they show that there is a possibility of trauma transmissions through biological mechanism. The one which have been mentioned is epigenetics. And then the attachment. So when we talk about the attachment, we are on, for example, storytelling. The study we conducted in Rwanda have shown that the way people are attached to their parents might be protective, might be a factor of protection or a factor of vulnerability. Why? Because some parents, they have tendency to talk about a lot to their children of what happens during the genocide and the war, but others also, they are not, they don't want to talk about that. And all of those they provoke a kind of traumatic exposure to their children. Others, they have a way of balanced way of talking about. This is what we can say like attachment. Another consequence is the distortions of cultural values, because with a longer period of exposure to trauma, there is a distortion of cultural values. As you can see on this picture, there is a lot of colors. Who know which color is the best, what can I see, how can I behave, because then Africans' values have distorted. If the values are distorted, then the consequences of distortions of cultural values, mostly because Africans are collective. We live in a family. We give very much value to what family can do for us. Then our cultural values like solidarity, like unity, like working together, and also Christianity, which have been really, I may say on my side, misused in that period, and it was somehow helping in the previous years, but now not that much. Then in the family, we have a lot of family conflict and intimate partner violences. You can see that about 1/3 of African women, especially in East Africa, they experience physical or sexual abuse. And the overall prevalence of all forms of intimate partner violence in East Africa, you can see 33. This is a very huge percentage of intimate partner violence. Then the higher level, because of intimate partner violence, the cultural values have been distorted, and the family is more likely to not really existing. There is a higher level of intimate partner violence. Why? Because those people who are really uniting, they are the victims of so long-term conflict, long-term wars, and then again, mental disorder of the parents, but also mental disorder of their children. Because living in a family where there is no peace anymore, their children are exposed to different disorders. There is recently what we call the relationship disappointment stress syndrome, which is also found in East African communities. What is that? This is because people have been long time exposed to traumatic exposure. Then they have been experiencing critical living conditions like orphanages, violence, mistreatment, and so on. And we have cultural values in East Africa which encourage marriage, and marriage is like a day of things. They said you will head to your parents before marriage. You will not really be rich if you are not married. You are not getting the life as it is. You have to be married. The marriage is something which will help you to sustain life. And people really idealize what they will receive from the marriage. And because maybe many people, they were leaving children, they were living alone for many times because of the death of their parents, of their relatives. Then they also think, after getting married, it's a time to be healed because they have been living for so long. But now they think the husband, the wife, will be a source of healing their past traumatic wounds. This is an optimism, but everyone, men and women, they are thinking like they need a woman say, oh, when I will be in my family, I will be getting everything that will heal me in the future. And the man is the same. Then when they meet together, everyone is waiting for his partner to help. Then they look at each other, no one is helping. So they are unmet expectation, because no one is supporting, then it turn out with relationship disappointment stress syndrome. They feel deep sorrow, loss of interest in people, and somatic people. They are not somatic disorders like headache, sleeping problems, and they have a strong feeling of failure of purpose in life. I was also not only for individual, for familial, and for collectivistic implications of lack of peace on mental health, but I talked about also the leadership issue and the mental health. Research shows that leadership roles are associated with high demand, social mistreatment, and the conflict resolutions. And this requires a psychological well-being, but I don't know if the leaders of Africa, they are really have a psychological well-being if they are also victims of the trauma. I don't know if they have been treated before being the leaders. So maybe, and I'm not saying the leaders or up level, for example, the president, but also all those kind of leaders, they are also the victims of trauma. Maybe the way they react, they intervene within people, it's also traumatically influenced. Maybe a hypothesis, but they are the victims of trauma. And they are the survivors of trauma for a long time. None of them, especially in Africa, you will find they have been refugees, they have been immigrated because of political crisis, they have been in their countries, they were wars, in their families, there was chaos. So what can we do with if we have also maybe leaders which still have been exposed for so long traumatic events? Then what are the gaps? Again, we have a lot of gaps in Africa. There is no, there is limited research about the problems of mental disorders related to lack of peace. Mental health institutions, there is limitation of mental health institutions, and those who are also available, there is lack of awareness for population to use those mental health institutions. There is no peace, there is no sustainable peace. We are always living in chaos worlds. There is no adapted interventions to help, because the interventions we are using are also Western oriented. So we need to have the interventions which are adapted to our context. And then lastly, professional, there is limited professionals to intervene and to help those people to overcome. I may say, if it's possible to maybe to have professionals to heal the entire collectively, maybe all leaders will be also healed and our community will be healed, and then we will have a sustainable peace in Africa. Then what to do if we have such kind of so long traumatic exposure from the slavery, the colonizations, the independence, but the independence with wars, the wars of mental disorder, the mental disorder with individual mental disorder, with family problems, with everything, with community issues like a historical trauma where people have high level of mistrust. Then what can we do? It's kind of take-home message to me. We need to break the silence of violence in Africa, if possible. But also we need to break the cycle of the intergenerational trauma, because otherwise, if we continue, if I am traumatized and I don't have the willing to break, I will continue to transmit it to my children, and my children will continue to suffer. If they continue to suffer, that means I don't think we have peace. We can have peace when people are still suffering from mental health. I don't find this. So we need to break for our generation. For our generation, we need to do our best to stop the cycle of intergenerational disorders, intergeneration. Maybe we might be the survivors, we might be the victims of what happened, but also we need to prevent such kind of intergenerational trauma to our children. And then we need a corrective healing. No one needed to be left behind, because Africans have been collectively traumatized. They have been collectively traumatized. We may say in many countries of Africa, still today, in Somalia, in DRC, in Ethiopia, in Zimbabwe, not maybe Zimbabwe, maybe Mozambique, ongoing trauma, ongoing corrective trauma. So there is a need of also ongoing collective healing. We need to contribute to unity of Africa and peace by restoration of Ubuntu values, I am because you are, and sustainable mental health services. So this is the end of my expose. I have also the references, and I thank you very much for your attention. Maybe I was too quick, but this is the time we can share and comments on the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Celestin, for this wonderful presentation. You may wish actually to stop sharing the screen so that we can see each other. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And you can see this is a newly PhD holder, so is very well versed with presentation skills. So this is really has been a very nice presentation, very, very clear to the point. So this is really wonderful. And so we are now invited to ask questions and make comments, exchange experiences as much as we can. So you are all welcome to ask. Richard, could you start, please?
Yes, please. Good afternoon.
Afternoon
Please,
to you.
can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I was happy when I heard him to be a clinical psychologist. And may I ask this? Has he bothered to observe the culture of cells, organs, and the entire system of human beings? Well, I'm a science student. Then I have been a science student, and then a science teacher, professional teacher, and then Bells University to my PhD with science education. But one thing I've observed that mental conflict are conflict not within the human being, but conflict with the cells. So what do we do to put them at peace first before the entire body become peace? That is individual peace building. So I would want him to get to answer the other question, the first questions first before I see the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Richard. You are maybe, if I heard well, your questions is how can we help myself?
Yes, I said, have you bothered to observe the culture of cells, human cells? I mean, the brain cells. We are thinking of what is it? Mental disorder and mental peace and so on. Have you bothered to observe the culture of cells? One, within the brain. Two, the organs, and then the entire system of human being. Have you their culture, because they live like us, like human beings. They have their own culture, they have their own community within the human body system. Have you bothered to observe their behavior so that we can relate that to the peace? Because when they are at peace, human become peace. The body system, the human being becomes peace, both in the mind, in the physical aspect too. Then before we think of our close door person or our close neighbor, Have you seen that? Okay, so you just you can get me an answer to this, and then.
Well, let's try to answer as I understand. That means we need first our self-care, yes? Because we cannot help people if we are not healthy enough. Then how can we be healthy? Because to be healthy as an individual, to be psychologically well-being as individual, there is a lot of things you have to be. You have to think, who am I? Who am I? Am I a person from, because people try to say, when I'm here, I always say, I am not black, for example, because I have a black skin, but I am not black. To have something does not mean you are something. So you can say you are Tanzanian or Burundian or Rwandan, but maybe you have a nationality of that. So you have to think who I am. If you are a victim of something, you have to start. The first thing to me, it's to stop the victimization status you have on you, and to start a new journey of bouncing back to be a victor of the history. So many people, they have been slavery of their past, traumatic exposure, and they don't want to stop by there and to start a new life. So to have your self-care, to know about what to do, you have to know who I am, what the problems I have today, and where can I ask for help? Not before help, who I am, what the problem I have, how can I get really, how can I overcome those problems? And if not possible, where can I get help? And then if you reach that level, you can be able also to help others. I may say leaders need such kind of ways before you become a leader, before you become a doctor, before you become anyone you are, you need to also heal yourself. Because you will help people, but you will give what you have. It's not possible to give what you don't have. I don't know if I responded to the questions, but yeah.
Yes, you're almost there. And please let me add this. One thing I've realized, my personal observation, that at times I could sense voices totally throughout my body. But I try to put things, what I try to put in places, I check my diet properly. I don't get closer to a lot of blood activities, and then I exercise, and then I make sure my environment are always neat, and then there I realize I am in consonance with the voices that I not spiritual voices, in consonance with the voices that I hear. Then always I become peace to myself, my family, and then to the outside neighbor. That is the peace that I have. And so I have been in peace with even my studies, my research, and my professional activities too. So this is thank you very much for you coming. Okay, good.
Thank you very much. I thought this is the soul piece. The soul piece. If you want to bring back your inner peace, you need to do exercises, to sleep well, to eat well, to try to connect with positive people that bring positive energy to you. This is kind of techniques, but in a global thinking, it's better to know who I am and who I want to be, because the psychological journey to change, it's like coming from yourself toward yourself, but coming from today, the person who is not good today, towards the good person you wanted to be tomorrow. And you will never, this is the idea, you will never be there, but at least you're on the way.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. If I may turn to Thomas. Thomas, please, you are welcome.
Yes, hello. Celestine, thank you for your talk. Very interesting. I'm fascinated by the link between philosophy and academic work and healing. The first paper I ever gave to an association of philosophers of peace was about the link between philosophy and healing. I think as academics, we all are in the healing game after all. You know, you've just finished your PhD, Celestine, congratulations. So you're a doctor, which means you're a healer now, right? I want to share something from Europe and my work as coordinator of philosophers for peace here in Europe. We ended the Cold War, we hoped, in 1990, because medical doctors teamed up with the peace movement and peace academics to say we cannot fight a nuclear war, the planet will die. And it was the influence of the medical profession that influenced Gorbachev, Reagan, Thatcher to sign away their nuclear weapons, right? My suggestion, having listened to your very moving talk, I think we peace studies scholars should make an alliance with the medical profession in East Africa. You need to talk to the, professional bodies of medical doctors in the hospitals and the psychotherapists and psychiatrists that are dealing with this epidemic of self-harm, suicide, depression. And we should then collectively say to the powers that be, the political elites who are speaking in New York at the UN, you have to stop these wars, like the one that's broken out in the Sudan. This is traumatizing a whole country, right? So it's a suggestion. And I have a model for this. I listened to a very important conference in America recently, where they have this spate of gun violence. Teenagers can buy guns, they're going and shooting people in schools. It's causing trauma throughout the country. A bunch of medical doctors in America working in hospitals that have to treat these gun wounds have now developed what they call preventative medical models. So they follow up the victims and they go to the neighborhoods and they say to the police, you have to get the guns out of this neighborhood, because they realize that it's easier to prevent these violent shootings than to just keep treating and taking the bullets out. So there's a shift. The medical doctors in New York particularly are now working like peace envoys. So that shift back to Africa, I would be very happy to work with you and other colleagues on this call as an outside, expert in this. How can we get the peace studies community, and we're not very many, are we, to work with the medical profession? I just wondered, Celestine, what are you planning to do? Where are you going to take your research next? Have you thought of what you're going to do with this? That's one suggestion. You could help coordinate that.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you so much for very wonderful contributions. I think on the point of view, philosophical, psychological, and medical, I also agree we could not have peace and sustainable peace if we are not looking on mental health. Because I think also for those so-called labels, people with delinquency, people, they continue to make such kind of criminality, but because of mental disorders. And to have a sustainable peace, I believe we need to stop the cycle of violence, the cycle of mental disorder, and who commit violence, who commit crimes, who is engaged in the negative behavior of the society is the big victim of trauma-related disorders. So then we will continue to such kind of violence. If you will see the history of some people with so-called dictatorship, you will find most of them, they have been experiencing a very harsh childhood. So to me, I agree with you, Thomas, that I can really collaborate in any project. We can put it together, the sustainable peace, using the means of medical doctors, psychotherapists, and psychiatrists to bring sustainable peace in Africa.
Maybe Celestine, okay, I can see a hand from Irene. Irene, you're welcome. And please unmute your microphone.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from
Hello.
Arusha, Tanzania. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this the platform and the opportunity to meet all of you here, and also the chance to also comment. I had Thomas Daffen. I really like his comments, what he said. And now for me, from Africa, particularly Africa and Tanzania, Tanzania has been regarded as a peaceful country. But I've had a previous speaker, because I joined in late, I've had a previous speaker was speaking about inner peace. And my colleague, Celestine, has been also talking about it. But for me, with regard to Thomas Daffen, I'm talking about the issue of inner peace, and when we are particularly at the family level. In Tanzania, we are not like New York or in America, where people, they use guns to kill each other and their problems. Here, the challenge is violence at the family level. You can go even to the extra mile in quality gender-based violence. There are some cultures, a husband committing violent acts towards his wife and children is like a normal way to power relationship pressure, and also a normal way to putting children in their place. So, and this problem is growing. We have incidents where at school, children have been suffering from corporal punishment at the hands of their teachers. School kids at the primary school, and we had an incident where a child was beaten and this kid died. In the whole country, we really mourned, and we were not happy. The whole country was united about it. But there is a debate going on about corporal punishment, whether kids should be punished by teacher with corporal punishment or should be left out. This is still going on. But my main concern is this violence. Power relations, which is based on power relations, which is based on culture, like the husband teaching his wife, or at the household, at the family level. This is not safe. Now, how can we express this, and also how Thomas, when he says that medical doctors want to partner with us, Africa, can we partner to express this violence to the family level, against children, against women, against special groups of men, people with disabilities, old, the elder generation also are facing also violence. So if we are talking about the inner peace, my point is peace at the family level. If we reach peace at the family level, it will be easier to express this peace at the community, at the whole country, at the regional level. Thank you very much.
Yes, I think it was a good comment, Dr. Irene, and I'm happy to meet people from Tanzania. You are talking about intimate partner violence and family conflict, and how also parents are harsh. They provide harsh punishment to their children. And I think from what I know with research and with clinical experiences, it is from the background of defective parenting style. Why do a parents harshly punish a child? Because it is the only way he knows or she knows. He have been treated like this by the parents. And this is why I said at the beginning, when the first person asked, it's Richard, you have to know who I am. I have been beaten by my parents. And then if I don't want to stop, such kind of misbehavior of torturing the people, then I will continue to torture also my children, and then I give a heritage to my children to torture their children. And it's coming from familiar level, and this is intergenerational violence transmissions. Because Elaine, I don't know if you have beaten harshly by your parents, and I don't want to say yes or no. But if you have been like that, this is what you will exercise to your children, because this is what you know. So we have a very huge work to do to our Africans to teach other alternative way. The people, most of the time, people who are beating harshly their wives, their children, it is not because of ignorance, but it's the way they don't have any other alternative. It's from our side to provide an alternative of not beating the children. And then they will be positive. And if I am positive, then that means my children also are positive. They will learn from me. When they will get married, they will also apply them techniques. But the techniques that we are applying, it's the techniques of violence that we have been learned for a long time in our families. This is why, and there is no peace if all children are hearing from the father, when he enter in the house, they all have to be quiet. They have to change the attitudes. The wife needed to be afraid for a long time. My grandfather was like this. My father was like this. I have to be like that. Then be sure your children will be like that. Nothing else. So we need to stop, as Thomas said, we need to work with all those people to have a sustainable life by changing means of knowledge, because there is a lack of knowledge for many things. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm looking for another hand, or you may put your question in chat somehow.
I see, I'm sorry, George, there's a hand in Gapemba. I see the hand is up.
Whose hand? I can't see it, sorry.
Ngapemba.
Ngapemba, you are welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Thank you very much, Celestine, for a nice presentation. I've heard somewhere talking about when I was trying to look at your CV, I've come to realize that you like a filmmaker. See,
yes,
to have something to do with the media. I would like to comment on that side as regards to what I've said. I think in future you need to say something about that, because today we are very much affected by the media. We are taught that we become what we see or what we hear. So today we are living in the free world. We see everything. Here in Europe, sometimes we have movies concerning bad things, gangsters movies. So some of the children take this as part of the pleasure, but now it's very, very dangerous, I think, for their future, because they distort their minds. So you have to consider this one. And also when you come to the other side, when you talk about peace in Africa, I think for me, it's a very complicated subject, though you have tried your best to show us how we should solve the problem. I really appreciate the way forward you had given us. I can say even here in Europe, as a student, of course, we don't have peace as a peace per se. It's a little bit complicated to define peace, but peace, so one can say, is a feeling of calmness or not being worried. But when we talk about peace in Africa, we mean that the presence of wars. So people are fighting, leaders with the other parties. No peace in the community, people are fighting. But if also you lack a tranquility in your soul, you are not at peace with yourself, then you are at war. There is no peace. I would like you also to quote some of the journalists who wrote some books. For instance, I read one of the good writer who called Naomi Klein, who wrote one of the books called No Logo, A Shock Economy. He wrote and he taught many things about what the capitalists are doing in the third world countries. So they contribute to to make sure that we don't have peace in so many ways. You see, you hear what is happening in some parts of Africa, the contribution of these capitalist ideas, because it's a principle of guiding the world. And also, even if you read someone also called Naomi Chomsky, also he wrote something about who rules the world. So we see a lot of people from outside trying to make sure that some part of the world, they don't have peace. And even if you see the issue of refugees, I worked in the street for 4 months, distributing foods as part of my courses. I was interested to see some of the refugees from different countries in Bologna, for instance. So many refugees. I talked with them on the street. Some are learned peoples coming from Africa, Afghanistan. I mixed with them. I've come to realize that it is a business. So HWO, UN, they're doing business. So they disturb the world. That's business. They make money. So we have to consider also this when we talk about peace. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a comment, not a question. I can also comment. To me, when we are talking about peace, well, to me, I may say at individual, familiar, and the community level, it has layers. But globally, it's the absence of the war. But at individual, they say tranquility. For example, when the people are not stable, they have tranquility. What you are talking to me in Africa, if we stop the wars, if we try to stop the wars, if we will try to stop the disorders, mainly mental disorders, because this is my way, we might be reach the individual tranquility, the individual peace, because the individual peace is not assessed or evaluated by anyone else, is assessed by everyone, not generally. According to media, yes, I'm doing filmmaker and film, and I think, why do I use film? Because in our countries, I find both, there were two reasons. One, people are not, our culture really, it's for in Rwanda, but I have conducted also a study with Kenyans and Ugandans. And now we are conducting a study with Tanzanians. We find that holding sadness, not talking about our sufferings, it's a sign of strongness. People told you, you don't need to share. You have to stay strong. You have to be a man. And to be a man means to stay with your inner sufferings. You don't need to talk about it. But we know we need to talk about our sufferings so that the sufferings will not remain in ourselves, but will go out ourselves. The film is one of the way people will learn of how to release their emotional instability. The second thing is the connection between the science and the community. If we are talking here, we are making the research, we will publish a lot, but we know our community, how many people are able to read chi-square, how many people are able to read the regressions and the correlation and the things and the papers in the journals. But at least they might be able to watch a movie if it's educative about what is happening. Here, Irene, she was talking about intimate conflict, but all those things, they sometimes are untold. No one is talking about what is happening in a family, that people are being beaten by their partners. But if you put into a movie and people realize this is an issue, and with a movie we have a wish, but you have to educate also people, and a movie is easily spread for the entire level. No one is not able to watch, only those who are blind, but every person who is able to watch is possible to watch. But not every person is able even to join this Zoom meeting. This is for the educated people. We are speaking in English, and maybe people are not, and not maybe, how many people are speaking English in our countries? So we need to have another way of accessing our community. And each strategy has its pros and cons, but at least we have to use it as a need.
All right, thank you so much. Afiz, please proceed. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I really appreciate our presenter concerning his response to the beating of children. And I think beating of children is not only limited to Africa. Why I agreed that there is a way, or there is a need for us to review the beating of children. That does not mean that we should remove the discipline. So we need to consider other way of disciplining the children in order to know the essence of what we are trying to let them know. But that doesn't justify the base that we should remove the discipline totally. Or what is your view on this? And secondly, if we are talking about peace in Africa generally, there is a need for Africa to unite in terms of politically, economically, socially, and other aspects of life. So whether BRICS or UN, United Nations, or World Health Organization, what we actually need is a unit Africa, United States of Africa. And more so, the economic power or political power should not lie in one country to avoid domination. So there should be a principle that will guide all the countries in terms of democracy and how the benefit of democracy can circulate within and among the citizens, and in a substantial way of corroborate with the global world, because no continent can be an island in its own continent. So we have to work in hands together with other continents as well. So that's my submission. Thank you.
You are welcome, Feza. Let's start by the last one. This is very much political, and I am a psychologist, but I will say what you say is true. We need a unity of Africa to stop cycle of trauma, to stop wars. This is what I can say on that. On the topic of diplomacy, political, I am not an expert, but what I knew, all Africans need to raise and to put hand in hand, as the first song was talking about, to stand, to stop traumatic events. what are the main traumatic events in Africa? Is the wars, is the conflict. And the end result of traumatic events in Africa is the sorrow, is the depression. How can we have peace with depressed people? It's, to me, looks not possible. How can we have peace? For example, now I showed you the prevalence of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders in the population of Africa. It's ranged between 10 and 50%. And then although you can build all infrastructure, you can provide money, people can be rich, but I don't think they will have sustainable peace if such kind of mental disorder. People mentally ill, they are far away of being peacefully. For the first thing, this is the first comment and the questions. You are right. We are not here to say, stop beating children. No, but I'm here to say, stop to not looking for alternative of beating children, because there is alternative of not beating children. So stop to only stick on one measures, which is easy to you, but it's lazy also. It's violent, it's lazy, but try to find another one. For example, I was discussing with my colleague in the morning, and I asked, it was the same questions. People say, if you are a child in Africa and you broke a glass by accident, you can see how much you are being beaten by your parents. They beat you until you are about to die because of only breaking a glass, coming by accident. And sometimes it breaks you. No one care about the wound. No one care about how you need to be really cared. But they say, no, we broke our glasses. Then we need to look at the value of human being, not materials. Then if you say, if you have another way, you can approach the child, ask what happened, and if you find it's an accident, then you calm him, you try to say, oh, sorry, I'm not here to teach positive parenting, but there is other alternative way. And we don't need really to be not really effective to our children. We need to show very much discipline, but not violent, this so-called violent discipline. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Stella, you are welcome, Stella, for a question or comment.
Thank you. Good day, everybody. So my name is Lucan Stella. Mine is more of like a comment. And I'll start with what Afi said about a united Africa and all that. Truth is, yes, a united Africa is possible, but there are very deep-rooted issues in Africa that will take a long time for these issues to be solved. When we look at the current happenings in Africa, it begs for a lot of questions. And where do we begin from? Often we tend to look at our leaders, but then do we ask ourselves as the citizens, the individuals, if we are doing the right thing towards building the kind of society we want to build? So often we tend to blame the leaders without blaming ourselves. And then back to the topic that is being discussed. Truth is, when there is lack of peace, the psychological trauma is really too much. And I will speak to this with reference to what is happening in Cameroon when we look at the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon. The last time I was back home in Cameroon, I would say I went home and I came back with a lot of trauma, because I went back to a society that used to be peaceful. People used to live happily. But then going back to that society is almost like a desert. You meet people that you used to know, and they are expressionless. Like they don't have any expressions on their faces. So when you talk to them, you get to understand what they are going through. The trauma is too much. And when we look at those who now call the displaced people from the Anglophone regions of Cameroon, who have moved to maybe the bigger cities in the French region of Cameroon. I had an instance where I spoke to several people, and they had family members who ended up committing suicide. But then these things are not talked about, but it's as a result of the conflict, the stress of the conflict, losing everything and trying to move on with life. It becomes difficult. But then the challenge now is research is not being done about the trauma of this conflict, the psychological impact of this conflict. Research is not being done about it. And then it becomes difficult when a society doesn't even acknowledge that psychological trauma does exist. I will give a simple example. In the current state of conflict, you meet young girls who have been through sexual abuse, sexual violence. But then when they go to report to the law enforcement officers, the first question usually is, where did it happen? What were you wearing? But then they don't understand the trauma that that person is going through. So it is actually an issue. So we have to start from, I'll speak in my context, we have to start from realizing the fact that these trauma, these psychological issues do exist. Once that realization is there, and then we can start forging ahead mechanisms on how to address these issues. We can start encouraging people to speak out, because most often people don't speak out about these things because of the fear of what might happen. For instance, the families I spoke to who had lost family members to suicide, my question was, would you be free to relate your story to me and I can put it out there? I'm a researcher, I'd like to do a research on that. And the response was no. Once these things are out there, we don't know what can happen to our family. We are going to be shunned by the society because the society doesn't believe that as a Black person, especially with the macho stereotype that we have in Africa, can commit suicide. No, those things are not, no, that's not African. You see, so there is an issue there. So identifying the problem is very important. So that's just my contribution.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I was really shocked when you talk about people who don't know the trauma. And this is in Africa, the acknowledgement, social acknowledgement of post-traumatic experience is still a problem in many countries of Africa. You are going to look a doctor because of sexual violence, and why were you there? You should not go there. So please, as you said, we need more research. For example, in Cameroon, to make aware that there is mental health problems in people. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great. Can I go to Lester and then Howard, please? Thank you very much. Lester, please unmute your microphone.
Oh, we have to unmute.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I've never done this before. So I'll try to be brief because Howard is much wiser than I am. But I was noting that Dr. Celestin is talking about how the mental health treatments tend to be based on Western models. And I think he has double vision, like Du Bois talks about. And I'm wondering how can we use traditional wisdom, maybe connected with the psychology from the Western tradition.
Wonderful. My project here is working on what you are talking about. How can we use that kind of local wisdom? I am making a movie. I plan to make a movie to correcting the point of view how Africans perceive and express post-traumatic experiences, because the ways people, yes, we have in common because we are all human beings, West, East Africans, we are all human beings. We have such in common of sorrow, of depression symptoms, the common symptoms, but we also have the differences. So now the research I am conducting is to the assessment of such differences from West to Africans. And then we will need to hear from the professionals in mental health to ask them, what did you find is more helpful to our Africans in addition to what you do? Because we don't need, I am not such person who say, this is nothing, it's a rap. No, we should combine it. But how can we improve the professionals and the trauma survivors? Because the way we intervene, most of the time we have our basket here, and we know you are sick, and we know what to do for you. So the movie we are making, it's also to ask for the trauma survivors. Yes, we have our basket, but what do you think is also helpful? We will also include traditional healers and church leaders, because those people also, they have their way of helping people with mental disorders, but professionals, they don't know what they do. Maybe what they do is helpful in combination of professional things. And those traditional healers, maybe they have other ways, but who knows? This is what we want to explore. So I may say we need to know to make an assessment of what is available and to make an adaptations of the Western way of intervention to our culture, to our context, to our way of understanding of our clients or victims. I think this is the way I think we can intervene.
Great, thank you so much. I'm glad you're doing a movie about this too. That's a wonderful idea.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we go now to Howard? Thank you for waiting, Howard. I was about to read the question that you put in chat, but now if you can speak, that would be even better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid I may say too much. My first response to Celestine's account of what's going on in East Africa was despair. It's impossible. Nothing can be done. But then I thought about it, and I had so many ideas that I think I have to cut myself off after a while, because I could go on and on forever. But one of the things that I think is sort of a basic principle is question everything. Question the whole idea of mental health. Question the whole idea of nation states. Question the economy. Question everything. I wouldn't rule out mental health. I wouldn't rule out anything. That's the unbounded idea. We consider everything. But I'd like to use some time to give two or three positive examples, or what at least I regard as positive examples. And one of them picks up on what Celestine suggested, and several other people have seconded, and I'd also like to second it, and that is to bring back Ubuntu. And this is a project, and you can read about it in chapter 9 of my book, Economic Theory and Community Development. If you don't want to spend $10 to get the Kindle edition on Amazon, you can ask me for a free copy of chapter 9. I'll email it to you. Chapter 9 is about a project on the south side of Johannesburg, where I would describe these conditions as similar to the one Celestine described in East Africa, but less severe. It's a less severe case of the same thing. That is to say, sexual abuse, crime, violence, venereal diseases. It's the same deal, but not as intense. And this project, which is described by the participants themselves as bringing back Ubuntu, it starts off being an employment project. As sort of start with, well, what people need is a decent job. Well, the government of South Africa couldn't pay for a decent job, so they paid for a job, which was poorly paid, it wasn't because the intention was to pay people poorly. It's because the government didn't have much money, but they did have some. And with what they did do, they ran an example that actually worked. And you can read about exactly how it worked if you read my chapter 9. The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, toured the project and immediately said, well, we have to extend this to all of South Africa. But he had to give up because he couldn't raise the money for it. They didn't completely give up. There's still some, with limited funds, there's still some more pilots going on to the same sort of thing. Okay, that's one positive example. Another one is the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. And after the fall of Rome, the situation in Europe was rather similar in many ways to the way it is in and has been in disaster areas around the world at different times. That was the time when the church invented celibacy. They also invented the monastery. And a monastery is a place where you pray and you work and you don't have children. That's another sort of basic point. I hate to say it because nobody wants to hear it, but the biological fact is that the Earth simply cannot sustain the number of humans that there are on this planet. They've got to somehow reduce that number. And in this respect, I want to say, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. People are complaining in Europe because the birth rate's going down. They say, Europeans are having too few children. There's a demographic transition that's really bad news because it's bad for economic growth. Well, economic growth is the number one thing to question. That's the problem, not the solution. That's a problem that Ubuntu can solve, because it's a way that people can sort of invent ways of supporting each other, which don't say, well, I may and may not give you any food, and that depends on whether you give me money. And that's sort of the modern way of life that is our problem. It's not the solution is not to modernize everybody. It's to recover the capacity for community, for caring and sharing. Well, that was actually done. My capacity community was so. And within the Middle Ages, another phenomenon that I think is worth attention is the 7 deadly sins. They were promulgated by Pope Gregory I, also called Gregory the Great. And if you read the 7 deadly sins, you can read them as a recipe for coping with disaster. And there was a disaster in Rome at the time when Pope Gregory announced them. People were hungry, people were sick, there were violence, there was war, there was a famine. Farming was abandoned because nobody wanted to farm. And what did the Pope do? Well, among other things, he took a lot of people into holy orders. His own home, he came from a rather fairly well-off family. He turned his own home into a monastery and recruited a lot of sisters and brothers. And what did they do? Well, one of the main things they did was to go to the abandoned farms and cultivate them. They actually generated food and then they distributed it to the needy. And it was said that the Pope Gregory would not eat in Rome until everyone else in Rome had a meal. So this is an historical precedent that I think should be considered. If you read through the 7 deadly sins, I think you can see that if everybody lived that way, our problems would be over. And you notice that one of the 7 deadly sins is gluttony. I mean, don't eat more than you need. In general, don't use more than you need. Here Gandhi speaks to us, and Gandhi says there's enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. Well, sometimes there really isn't enough for everyone's need. But what you can do is you can create it, and that's one of the things we've done that's outside of Johannesburg was growing food. Okay, I think I talked enough, but I want to go back to my first point. Oh, I want to mention one other thing, and that is, in questioning everything, question money. I think something that needs to be taken seriously is modern money theory. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of modern money theory. But modern money theory starts from the premise that governments don't really need taxes. Governments make money. Money is something that can be issued by the government. And what the government should do is first things first. And the first thing is a job for everybody. First thing you do after you, with money, is you make sure everybody has some, and everybody is doing some work to justify having it. This was actually put into practice in Argentina when the Argentine economy completely collapsed for a couple of years. But then it was this sort of a right-wing big fuss about it, and the IMF hated it, and they had to shut it down. But it was working, and you can read about the Argentine experience if you want to. So people say that this is irresponsible, it's inflationary, and so on, but it's not inflationary, and the reason is that the people who have thought of modern money theory thought of this in advance. They're not quite aware that inflation is a big danger. So the project, and this was put into practice in Argentina, is that at the same time that you put first things first about what money is for, what you do with it, and what you first do with it is make sure everybody's taken care of the same way the Pope didn't eat till everyone else had eaten. And then you worry about inflation. And there are things to do about it. We would sort of take it for granted that the way to lick inflation is to punish the working class. You raise interest rates, you raise unemployment, and then when wages are down and profits are up so enough that people start investing again, you think you're dealing with inflation, but you don't have to do it that way. One thing you can do is you can distinguish between what's called demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Cost push means that the people raise prices because their own costs went up. And demand pull means they take advantage of the situation. As this is written up by John Maynard Keynes in his essay, How to Pay for the War. John Maynard Keynes was in charge of finances for Britain during, well, he wasn't in charge, but he inspired the people who did it. He wrote the theory of it, that the how to pay for the war without inflation and without big high interest rates, and it worked. But you just have to question everything and try to think of possible examples. One way that it worked is, and this was also repeated in Argentina, was the business people took a pledge that they would raise their prices only if they had to because their costs went up. They were not going to take advantage of the fact that there was lots of money floating around because the government was trying to promote purchasing power. And that's a dilemma of governments today. They want to promote the economy. It's going on in the United States, for example, right now. The Democrats want to boost the economy by putting more money in circulation. The Republicans want to shut down the government by absolutely stopping any more. The debts are become unpayable. That's another point that, as you can read in the Bible, the periodic forgiveness of debts has been necessary. You know all about this in Africa, where forgiveness of African debt has been an issue now for several decades. And that supposes something else. It supposes people who are mission oriented. If nobody does anything unless they're paid for it, then you've got to put money in circulation to try to get somebody to do something. But if medical doctors, this is something Plato emphasized, that is, we have to fight the sophists on this one. And Socrates dialogues with the sophists in Plato's dialogues. The sophists say, well, every business is really the same, with the purpose is to make money, every business. And Socrates said, no, that's not true. The purpose of farming is to raise food. The purpose of medicine is to promote health. The purpose of school teaching is to teach little kids to read. So, and then he argued that from the way we use language, the sophists are wrong. It's not that every business has the same purpose. They all have different purposes, and money is a means to an end. So you have to have people with a spirit of service, what's sometimes called conversion, to make much of anything work. Okay, I'll stop now. I talked too long.
Yeah, thank you so much, Howard, for this wonderful, really conversation. And definitely, we are going to read chapter 9 of your book. And I would like now, since we are actually out of time, I would like to ask Olufemi Oloba to please, close the meeting for us today and thank the presenter for us. And we are going to meet again next week. And today we have looked at psychology. Next week, we are going to look at grammar. This is Global Peace Studies for Sustainable Development in Africa. We learn a lot. I thank you for your wisdom. Olufemi, can you please close for us?
Okay, George. No problem. I will. So I'd like to thank everybody for sharing their thoughts, sharing their beliefs, and bringing forward new ideas and new ideals. And I thank them much for the presentation. It was lovely. Actually, I had some comments, but I think the time is gone. So let us move forward, and then we'll see next weekend, and then we'll discuss more. But thank you very much, everybody, for coming around, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. It has been wonderful. Cross-fertilization of ideas has been so great on this platform. Thank you very much, and thank you, Judge, for the good work. It has not been this beautiful. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. And tomorrow is International Peace Day, so I wish you a happy International Peace Day. Thank you.
Same to you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to
you.
say one word, like
Thank you.
Howard can send me the book. I send my email, and I look forward to read the book, and thank you everyone for listening to us.
Sure.
I send my email.
Thank you.
Teresa, is it also possible to send the reference? Because at the end of your presentation, there was reference. If you could send it through George, whatever.
Yeah,
you can send it through George, so we can get it in emails for those that want.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks.
And the books which have been shared, please, George, if possible, you can share to all members who participated. Okay, thank you very much and have a good day. There's another one.
Have a good
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.